at the end of the day, what's going to change Israeli behavior, even in the short term, is whether or not there's a hostage negotiation deal that comes about. And that's a negotiation happening with Egypt, with Qatar, and with the U.S. that was recognized in the UN Security Council resolution. I don't think this resolution, though, is actually going to make a huge difference, at least in the immediate term.
So Israel wanted a veto. They did not get it. What does that mean now for the chances of a ceasefire, or is it on to Rafah?
Yeah, I don't think it really changes the chance of a ceasefire. Blinken's been in the region. They've been meeting quite a bit. The Israelis sent a delegation. There was a report this morning that they actually have closer numbers, about 700 Palestinian prisoners, including 100 serving life sentences in exchange for about 40 Israeli hostages. So I think they're making progress, slow progress. I think this really is more about the politics. Netanyahu's really upset because what Netanyahu wanted was a direct link between the hostages and a ceasefire. No ceasefire without the hostages, which the U.S. tried to do in the resolution last Friday, vetoed by Russia and China. This says a ceasefire and release of the hostages. The U.S. is saying it's still connected. Israel is saying it's insufficient. The Arab world thinks that they're happy that something has just passed finally.
Well, Jonathan, it seems that increasingly there is somewhat of a disconnect between what the U.S. is saying and what Israel is saying, be it in regard to a potential ceasefire deal or the attempts to reach one, or just what will happen in Rafah. We heard from Vice President Kamala Harris speaking over the weekend, saying that she was ruling out nothing in terms of consequences if Israel were to pursue a military assault into Rafah. What realistically, though, could those consequences look like? And how likely is it in your mind that the U.S. would actually move to enforce any?
I think it really depends on what an operation in Rafah looks like. And that's frankly what Ron Dermer and Hanegbi's visit to the U.S. was supposed to discuss. If the U.S. has said now clearly that there are going to be consequences. I think there will be, but that's only if Israel goes into Rafah with multiple brigades and really storms through it in the same way it worked through Khan Yunis and Gaza City. If what Israel really does is say, okay, we recognize there's a challenge, we really do need to move as many of these people out of Rafah as possible. At the same time, we'll make this operation less of a full-scale operation and much more counterterrorism, which is what the U.S. is pushing. Then I think the U.S. actually would probably accept that. And my guess is, especially if there is a hostage deal, that's going to be much easier to complete because any hostage deal is going to have within it a temporary pause in fighting, and Israeli operations can't just resume as they were. You've already moved the brigades out. They'll have to come back in. So I think that there is still some opportunity to work together between the U.S. and Israel, but clearly tensions are rising.
I thought you might point to conditions as part of your answer on that, Jonathan, and I wonder what your thought is, having heard outrage over the weekend from some progressive Democrats, 22 of which in the House voted against the government funding bill because it included almost $4 billion for Israel. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Sunday morning, talking on television and on the House floor on Friday, she referred to this as an unfolding genocide on the floor of the House and called on the administration to stop sending weapons to Israel. Will conditions, or at least additional conditions, have to be attached to any further aid?
I don't know that they'll have to be attached. I mean, there was already, an executive order issued by the Biden administration making clear the humanitarian conditions related to all countries, including Israel, for U.S. weapons. I think the question is going to really be one of whether you have a temporary ceasefire and how Israel approaches this. Look, if they have a full-scale operation, then yes, I would expect many Democrats, and that includes folks like Chris Murphy and Senator Van Hollen, who have been pretty aggressive in this in the Senate, pushing back and saying, look, we have to condition aid. But if it's a smaller operation, if it's more precise, if it's what the U.S. has been trying to push Israel toward for a number of months now, frankly, then I don't think you'll get those same conditions. The reality is a lot of the weapons that we're talking about are things that are defensive in nature. I don't see the U.S. cutting Iron Dome missile resupply that's defensive to protect Israel.